All right, so now comes the part that some of you are not going to be super happy about, and that's what we call biochemistry. It's the chemistry of biology. All right, so how do we break down sugar to make ATP? And so, again, what we talked about is that there's sugars that are coming from three sources. The three sources are if you've just eaten sugar, there's going to be sugar in your blood. Your liver is going to have a storage form of sugar called glycogen, which you can break down when you need it, and then you release it, and that's going to be something you can use as a fuel. Or you're going to store sugar in your muscles as glycogen. So glycogen is this large molecule here, and as I said, when you store it, you need to store it with water. So that when you break it down and you're using it, and so one of the things that we talk about when we're going to talk later about needing to drink during exercise, every time we're breaking down glycogen, we're releasing water that our body can use as a hydration source. So that's one place where we're going to get some liquid. So we don't need to be drinking massive amounts because we're also going to get some stored water that we can use to keep our body hydrated. So blood sugar and glycogen can come into our muscle cells as glucose. Okay, so that's really what we're going to have in our muscle is this glucose. We're going to change it so that it's a little bit different than just plain glucose. And when that happens, that means that glucose can't go back out of the muscle cell. So if we have a lot of stored glycogen in this muscle cell and we want to pass it to another muscle cell that doesn't have any, we can't just pass it as glucose. But if we want to produce energy from that glucose, we go through a process called glycolysis. And what glycolysis is lysis means to break down. So glycolysis means to break down glucose. Okay, so glucose gets broken down in the process of glycolysis. And this doesn't need any oxygen at all. You can do this for a period of time without any oxygen. All right, and so when you break down glucose, one glucose molecule, through this process of glycolysis, it produces 2 ATPs without any need for oxygen. That glucose is now going to give you 2 of these pyruvate molecules because all we've done is taken a 6-carbon sugar and cut it into a 3-carbon sugar. And when we did that, we got the energy from cutting it and we stored it as ATP. So if we have if we're doing lots and lots of glycolysis, we're going to build up pyruvate. We're going to have some other things that we need to do glycolysis. And if we keep doing this and we just stop at pyruvate, we would run out of some of those in between, those kind of things that are the helper molecules. So what we have to do is we have to regenerate some of those helper molecules. And there's a couple of ways that we can do that. Pyruvate is this thing that happens when we're breaking down glucose. You've all heard of this thing called lactate because everybody thinks that lactic acid is what happens when we exercise really hard and we're sprinting, our muscles start to burn. That's supposed to be lactic acid. Well, it's not lactic acid, but it's other things that make our muscles burn. But anyways, what happens is you go really hard and you don't have enough time to use oxygen to regenerate those little things so that we can keep going with glycolysis. The pyruvate is broken down into lactate, and that lactate can now leave the muscle cell. All right, and that's regenerated the little in-between molecules that help us drive glycolysis further. But if we're going to be running or doing our exercise and our intensity is a little bit lower, we can actually get this pyruvate and take it into this structure here, which is the energy. It's really the energy generating structure within our cells, and that's your mitochondria. Your mitochondria is this organelle or this part of your cell where we can take energy derived things like carbohydrates that are broken down, and we can convert them into a lot more ATP. In order to do that, we're going to need oxygen because oxygen is what we need in order to use our mitochondria. Our mitochondria use oxygen to break down the fuels that we get into the mitochondria. And here in the case of pyruvate is transported into the mitochondria, and as it's transported into the mitochondria, it is broken down into something called acetyl-CoA. So it's charged from pyruvate, transported into the mitochondria where it becomes acetyl-CoA. And that acetyl-CoA enters what's called the TCA cycle. Okay? And so it goes through the TCA cycle, and as it breaks down this acetyl-CoA, we get this one glucose, gives us 2 pyruvates, gives us 2 acetyl-CoA, and that's going to be broken down into 6 carbon dioxide molecules that we're going to breathe out. We're going to use 6 oxygen molecules when we breathe in, and we're going to generate 28 ATP. So if anybody ever asks you why you breathe, why you need to breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, it's because your mitochondria break down things like acetyl-CoA. They use the oxygen you breathe in to break the acetyl-CoA down to make ATP. And they're in the process of doing this, you're going to produce carbon dioxide. And that's what you breathe out. So in order to get these 28 ATPs that are stored within this glucose molecule, you need to breathe in your oxygen, and then you'll have to breathe out your carbon dioxide. Okay, so when we break a sugar down, we're going to, from a single glucose molecule, we're going to get 30 ATP molecules, 2 from glycolysis, and 28 if we have enough time to use oxygen as a fuel to have that pyruvate go into the mitochondria through the TCA cycle and break down into ATP, 28 ATP, and 6 carbohydrate. All right, so when we're going to use sugars as a fuel, we're either going to get the sugar from our blood or from our stored glycogen. That's going to become glucose. The glucose is going to be broken down in glycolysis to produce pyruvate and 2 ATPs, 2 pyruvates and 2 ATPs. That 2 pyruvates are going to go into the mitochondria, where they'll become 2 acetyl-CoAs. Those 2 acetyl-CoAs will go through this TCA cycle, and using 6 oxygens that you've breathed in, you're going to produce 28 ATP, and you're going to be able to breathe out 6 CO2 molecules. And that's just to produce those 30 ATPs. And if you think back, in the brain, one action potential in the brain was using 100 million ATP. We're going to need a lot of sugar, or we're going to need another source of energy.